Hi, my name is Bradley Wilson, and I'll be talking to you about electronic communication today. Now, electronic communication is ubiquitous in today's society. Everything from chat rooms to emails to memos to text messages are sent out both professionally and personally every day. Now, it's a very fast and efficient way of reaching a very large number of people very quickly. But the problem is that it gives up all nonverbal cues, which are basically impossible to read from the text. And because of this, it's very easy to misinterpret these messages, and that can cause a lot of unintended side effects. The article being discussed is called Reducing Social Cues, Electronic Mail, and Organizational Communication by Lee Spruill and Sarah Kiesler. Electronic communication differs from face-to-face communication because of what advantages and drawbacks it brings. Now, understanding the weaknesses of electronic communication allows you to attempt to compensate for them and avoid the common pitfalls of this form of communication. The article states that there's two types of cues in social context. One is the static cues, and the other is the dynamic cues. Static cues are cues that do not change. They're the appearance of the person you're talking to, the physical items around you, maybe a desk, the office. It could even be the wardrobe or the clock. What time of day is it? Where are you? Dynamic cues would be all the nonverbal cues that are used in communication, like the intonation of speech, tone, volume, body language, facial expression, all of those things that you can use to get more information from the person you're talking to. Now, electronic communication is almost completely devoid of dynamic cues. There's no nonverbal cues given to you because it's all in a text format. And it's very, very hard to convey nonverbal cues through that, if not impossible. Now, static cues are muted. There's some things you can do about it, like you can affect the time of day it's sent or where it's sent or some of the content, but they're almost non-existent as well. It's all just text on the screen. Now, the article states that the level of the organization, the department that you're working in, the job title, and the demographic info are also not conveyed. But I would disagree with that because many times people have a signature at the end of their emails or on their memos that says their job title or what department they work for. So you get more of those cues now. The authors came up with 5 hypotheses to test when it came to electronic communication. They wanted to test if the context clues really were weak because you're dealing with unfamiliar senders, that you might just get a name and address from. The second is they figured that electronic communication, people sending these messages would be more self-absorbed and more focused on themselves in the conversations than they were on the recipient. They also thought that the behavior across all ranks of an organization would be very standardized. A manager would act the same in an electronic communication as a subordinate would. And they figured that these communications would also be less inhibitive. It would be easier to submit new ideas, and it would also be easier to be less formal and break usual norms that would happen in the workplace. And lastly, they thought that more info would actually pass to the group as a whole because you'd have so many more senders, and it wouldn't just be faster communication, it would be more communication, and you'd get more information to more people in a faster amount of time. Now, to test this, they tested 2 divisions of a Fortune 500 company that had already taken on electronic communication, and it was already part of their daily business. The findings affirmed both hypotheses. It showed that the social cues were in fact decreased because there were all these unfamiliar senders that they weren't sure how to interact with, and it was a little bit clunky at first. The second was also true. People much favor themselves, talking about themselves in a closed end-to-end in the content of the email, as opposed to talking about the recipient and the salutations and the content of the email. Now, the status was actually equalized. A subordinate and a superior would likely have the same behavior in electronic communication as they would if they were switched positions. And there was, in fact, less inhibition. There was more ideas passed. There was also a lot more profanity. It was a lot less formal, and it typically wouldn't be business format. It was also more likely for bad news to be passed because people were more comfortable passing it in a text format. And like they thought, more communication did happen. It wasn't just faster, it was a good amount more. I think it was 70% of the article that they said. And that was because there were so many more senders. There were more people talking to each other, so there was more people, more information being passed to each person. Now, to evaluate the usefulness of this article, I would say that the age of the article needs to be considered. It's almost 20 years old. It was written in 1986 when electronic communication was just sort of starting to be across most businesses, but most of the information is still relevant. I think some of it needs to be taken with a grain of salt, but most of it still is relevant. Like the reduced social cues, that's just a facet of that form of communication. You're not going to suddenly be able to read someone's nonverbal cues from a block of text. It's just not going to happen. And the article asserts that only the name and address would be known, but like I said earlier, most people have a signature on their emails now that give a lot more information than just a name and address. You don't even have to be a manager to have this. It's extremely common. Now, the demographic info is not given. Still, it's not, you don't put your age and gender and race on emails to coworkers, but I think that's actually better for communication because it reduces the amount of bias that could be brought into the equation. Now, I was really shocked by the amount of profanity that was used because it was quite common. The mean number was 33 or 34 emails that people saw profanity in per month. And I think that would be very much different today because electronic communication is used so much that the norms from face-to-face communication have transferred into that. So you'd be expected to be polite and more formal in these communications. Now, there was a lot less inhibition, and that's what caused the profanity. More ideas were passed, and it was also more likely for bad news to be passed. The other thing that needs to be considered when it comes to this article, though, is that it was only done with 2 divisions in one company. So you can't really generalize a lot of this behavior for the entire working audience because it was just from one company in 1986. But how this article could still be useful to us is just to understand that electronic communication is probably the most common form of communication in the workplace these days. And understanding how that communication really works could allow you to better apply the principles taught in this class to that form of communication. Like if you're trying to employ the problem orientation approach with a subordinate, if you try to do that through electronic communication, the sender has to make sure that every word is fine. They have to recheck that message over and over to make sure that the recipient didn't misconstrue it. It would be very easy to misconstrue genuine concern as passive aggressiveness or patronizing the recipient. And that is why I think this article was very important for this class. Thanks.